Hi guys, I'm Lisa. Welcome back to the channel. During the EEOC process, both we and our employers have an obligation to deal with each other in good faith. And last week I talked about some of the behaviors that EEOC cited when they called out NASA for failing to act in good faith. A lot of you let me know that you were interested in a part 2, and I appreciate that, so here it is. Bad faith behavior number 4 was failing to protect me from continued abuse. After several months of being told on paper that I was being accommodated, when in practice I really wasn't, I decided to file a second request for reasonable accommodation with my second-tier supervisor, letting her know that my accommodations were ineffective because I wasn't being allowed to use them. I explained the medical issues that I was dealing with and asked for her help in convincing my boss to let me use my reasonable accommodations. And after delaying my request for weeks, she said no. I asked NASA to amend my original complaint to add the new incident, but they insisted on keeping it separate, which meant that if I wanted to fight that one, I was going to have to go through the whole process all over again. Another investigation, another attorney, the whole thing. And because it was completely separate, my AJ told my attorney that unless NASA brought it up at my hearing, we weren't allowed to discuss it. And in her testimony, NASA's diversity manager slipped up and mentioned it, which opened the door to questions about it.
Was there an interactive dialogue after her second request?
No.
What kinds of accommodations did the second-tier supervisor agree to?
None. She was already being accommodated.
Did you investigate her claims that she wasn't being allowed to use those accommodations?
No.
Was anything done to ensure that she was going to be able to use her reasonable accommodations after that?
No, we didn't do any of that.
When you can prove that you told your employer you were being harmed and they did nothing to prevent it, that looks like a lack of good faith. Bad faith behavior number 5 is gross ignorance. OFO didn't actually say that. What they did was order NASA to send my boss and 2 different diversity managers to remedial training on the reasonable accommodations process. And they also asked NASA to discipline those 3 people. And that was totally EEOC's decision. I didn't ask for any of that. OFO didn't elaborate on the reasons they asked NASA to do those things. But during my hearing, my AJ cited a lot of pretty basic mistakes that they made throughout the EEOC process. So my interpretation was that EEOC ordered training for the mistakes that were due to ignorance and discipline for the mistakes that were intentional. He didn't break it down any further than that. In her testimony, my boss showed that there were some pretty basic concepts about reasonable accommodation that she didn't understand, like how my rights took priority over her preferences, or how telework for the benefit of NASA is different than telework as a reasonable accommodation. And the diversity manager came across as completely incompetent. She testified that I'd only ever submitted one version of my request for reasonable accommodation, even though my ROI had 5 different versions in it, each with a cover letter from me to her. By my hearing, that one version of the form was the only documentation that she had left in my file. Forms, emails, meeting notes, medical information, all gone. When my attorney asked her, she admitted that she didn't even try to preserve records on my case. She said nobody had told her to. And she and my boss hurt each other's credibility too. Like I testified that I first requested reasonable accommodation on January 19th. The diversity manager testified that my first request was mid-March because that was the date on the one form that she had kept. My boss testified that she had first learned of my request in mid-February from the diversity manager. How crazy is that? Whether you want to chalk them up to ignorance or intent, after a while, all those mistakes started looking like a lack of good faith. Bad faith behavior number 6, being vindictive. OFO didn't actually cite this behavior in their decision because it happened after my hearing. But I really think it affected NASA's chances on appeal because it turned into a circus. My attorney needed a copy of the transcripts to prepare our appeal. And NASA's attorney kept dragging her feet on giving us one, claiming that we should be the ones paying for it. In the end, NASA paid the bill, but not before they'd created a huge spectacle. It's possible that NASA's attorney was ignorant instead of vindictive, but I doubt it. And by definition, vindictive behavior is a definite lack of good faith. Last week in the comments, a lot of you pointed out what a great AJ I had. And I did. I was very lucky that he was willing to act as fact finder and call NASA out when he thought they were wrong. And I hope you get an AJ as good as mine. But just in case you don't, you can improve your chances by calling out your employer's sketchy behavior for what it is, a lack of good faith. Do it in writing, Be professional, but be direct and unapologetic. Once you get the hang of speaking truth to power, it can be a lot of fun, and it definitely makes it easier to build your case and get some justice. I'll see you guys next week. Till then, take care and hang in.